Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Meso. Today we're going to another fun and random episode for you guys this Friday because about a month ago I did a revisit of IMSA Racing on the 3DO M2 in 4K with the RetroTink 4K, talking about some of the earliest videos on my channel. I asked everyone if they wanted to see more 3DO M2 content in 4K and do a little bit of a revisit, and it was pretty much resounding yes. So today the second game we're going to take a look at is Ironblood. This is not Iron and Blood, the PlayStation 1 release, although it is basically the same. The title is Ironblood. This is the 3DO M2 version that was in development before it pivoted over to the PlayStation 1, and in some instances before it even had the Dungeons & Dragons license attached to it. Now there's going to be two different versions of this game within the video, and I'll explain what they mean when we get to them. But this is the Ironblood enhanced demo. This was designed to run on the 3DO M2, and this would have been a launch game for the hardware. This has a fully 3D arena as well as all of the models in 3D, real-time lighting in spots, and particle effects pretty much anytime you strike your opponent. This is what would have launched on the 3DO M2 had it actually come to fruition, and the best part is because this is a developer build, we have full debug options as far as the camera is concerned. We can pause it, take it around the character, zoom in and out, and really show you what the models and polygon count of an early generation 3DO M2 game would be. And you can see there those pseudo baked in lights on the side of the character's face definitely give it a much brighter appearance on one side versus the other. Now this was given to me a very long time ago by some of the people that worked on this, and I actually do have the full Ironblood source code on my hard drives. We've been talking about patching this up for a while now because there are other characters that you cannot play in this enhanced demo that we have the files for, and some can be played but their moveset is not basically connected in code. So there is more we could do with this, and if you are interested and can develop, leave me a comment down below because we could actually turn this into something that was a little bit more playable, even if only for a select few people. Now let's pivot over to some of the earliest attempts at Ironblood on the 3DO M2. This is what the game looks like on PlayStation 1, but of course this is running at a much higher frame rate with a higher poly model count as well as better textures all around. And ignore the frame rate counter in the top left hand corner. It does not seem to adhere to any sort of reality because this is running much faster than 23 to 26 frames per second. This is running faster than the game should run because it seems to have an unclocked frame rate. Therefore, you can basically get it as fast as the engine will allow, so you'll end up in a situation where the game physics and controls are faster than they should be because the in-game speed is tied to the frame rate in and of itself. Now this is much closer to what you would have seen on PlayStation 1, except in a much higher quality, and the developers realized that they could get something like this running on the 3DO M2 with much better backgrounds than these static 2D images you see here. As we pivot back over to the enhanced demo, do be aware that this interior model, this entire cavern, was taken from an SGI asset pack, so this is nothing that the developers at the 3DO company or anyone working on this game actually created. It was just borrowed, and as it was described to me, this is not very much time of work whatsoever. This may be, the course of a week's worth of experimenting around, and you'll see here, even with all of this early code, the game is still running stably, and had it actually had more time to be developed, it would have been something that you probably could have gotten a minimum of 30 frames per second, maybe a maximum of 60 out of. But as we zoom in on the skeleton's face here, you can see just how many polygons are used. That is a fully articulable jaw. It does have a pivot point, and you can see through the jaw into the character. You can also see some reflections on the knight's armor here, and I'll go into that texture in just a moment because I do have a question for all of you guys as to where it may exist from, because finding where textures come from is a very fun thing in retro gaming. Kind of looks like an outdoor scene to me, maybe a skyrise, maybe a city scene with it going down the road. That's what I see, but it is fun that you get those pseudo-reflective textures on the helmet as well. Now as we move back over to one of the earlier demos, you'll see here it boots up with the splash screen, which is essential on the 3DO and M2. You have to have that splash or else it will not boot the game, and it's a fictional title from a bogus developer. That's just part of the asset pack that comes to the 3DO M2 SDK or software development kit, so you can use that banner screen to get past the boot sequence and into your demo games. Now obviously this is the non-enhanced version again, just with two different characters. We have 3 builds of the non-enhanced version, all of which have different playable characters. We have the one enhanced build, which has about 75% of the characters playable and about 50% controllable. There are some other characters, including boss models, that could be put into the game. We do have the assets, we just don't have it strung together in code. But again, this is just wildly impressive. This is showing what the M2 M2 could have done, and these were demos that were made in late 1995, early 1996. So obviously, you know, 2.5 to 3 years before the Dreamcast would have been on the market, you could have had something like this on store shelves. I know on the IMSA Racing video, people were saying that it didn't look that much better than Nintendo 64. I can't agree. Obviously, something like this is going to look better than anything on the Nintendo 64, PlayStation 1, or Sega Saturn as far as 3D fighting games are concerned. And you have all of the effects as well, the particle effects, that barrier there with the transparencies. The 3DO M2 is pushing around a lot of different graphical effects in real time, and the game speed is holding up. Now imagine you actually spend 6 to 8 months developing this title fully, getting all of the arenas in. You're going to have a very pretty looking game. Now that's not to say it would have been a fun game, because Ironblood Warriors of Ravenloft on the PlayStation 1 is not what I would consider a good fighting game whatsoever. The engine just doesn't really hold up, but for here in the M2 version it seems to be doing a better job. The characters will address each other and stay focused on each other, where the PlayStation 1 version, it seems like your character will just point a random direction almost all of the time. As we go back into the model view again, I'm not saying that this is comparable to Dreamcast, but this is like 60% of something like a Soul Calibur in my opinion, with basically maybe 2 weeks worth of work put into it. And this is how impressive the 3DO M2 was back in the day, and why I'm always so disappointed we actually didn't get it as a retail console. And you'll see you even get some very blocky but existent shadows. Now if we move back over to the third non-enhanced demo, it's going to use the same background, but it's going to inject different playable characters in. And we do have the files and assets for this as well, so technically you could keep swapping characters in and out to try to get as much playable as possible. And I understand the amount of people in the world that could play something like this is probably underneath 10 as far as I can tell. You need to have an FZ-35S to be able to play Ironblood, any of the variants whatsoever, but from a preservation standpoint, I have made all of these files and games available on archive.org, so anyone who does find 3DO M2 hardware can enjoy this at their own leisure. And that's always what's so much fun about the hunt. I've had these files for probably a little over 5 years now, the source code as well, and it's one of those things, we can make this game do more, but it is hard to dedicate all the time to it because it has such a limited audience. It's not like you can just emulate this thing, it's not like you can just pop it in a PlayStation 1 and burn a disc and go, or even load it to your optical disc emulator. This hardware is exceedingly rare, and one of the reasons I really haven't spent much time to inject new characters into it is because I'm really one of the only people that can actually enjoy it, but I get to show it to you guys in 4K thanks to the RetroTink 4K as well, and that's why I'm kind of revisiting some of these earliest videos. One, to give more press to 3DO M2, and two, to get some more preservation of the footage in the highest quality we can. But as we move to this next demo, the enhanced demo, again with the same characters, you can just see how well defined the models really are, and I love having the full control over the camera. This is where a lot of the screenshots from back in the day would have come from. You'll see here, even his fangs are modeled in 3D. Probably uses like 2 to 3 polygons to get that there, but the designers were trying to put as much detail in each model as possible, so they even used polygons, or they just could have used a texture to kind of articulate the fangs, because honestly, as that gnome gremlin is jumping around, you don't get anywhere close enough to his face to actually be able to tell that he even has fangs in the first place, let alone fully 3D modeled ones. And you will see here, because it is a fully 3D game, you can dash in and out of the screen and pause as well, so you get a lot of these fun action shots, and you can just kind of scroll around the model and see what's going on. This is just so much fun to me. I was so excited the first time I played this, and honestly I probably haven't put Ironblood into my 3DO M2 in a little bit over 3 years. But a lot of you were asking to see more 3DO M2 content, I figured why not. And when I turned this on, I was met with the same sense of awe and wonder as I was when I first played the game over 5 years ago on my 3DO M2 hardware. And that's definitely not the villain from Superman, even though it looks like him. And I love that he basically has a 4-forked trident there. Although I guess if it's not a trident, it would be 3 forks. Tell me what weapon that is in the comments. And you will see here his block mechanic puts that weapon in front of him and spins it via telepathy. This is just filled with detail and charm, and it's so unfortunate we didn't get this version of Ironblood. It's fun that the PlayStation 1 version released, I do have it in my collection, but to say it is a good fighting game would be an absolute lie. I would put it in the bottom 10 fighting games I have ever played in my life, and the only reason I played it was because it was the same game that was supposed to come out on the 3DO M2. But imagine something like this, having all of these playable characters all with their own independent 3D modeled arenas with a soundtrack, all of these effects, all of these particles in 1996, 2.5 years before the Dreamcast would release in Japan, and almost 3 years till it would release in North America. You can see as you pause here, you do get those little bit of particle effects. Of course, they're baked in, and it's not probably calculating it in real time, but it is still impressive. And this is the type of stuff you could have had in summer of 1996, competing against the PlayStation 1, the Sega Saturn, and the Nintendo 64. And the story goes is that Panasonic got cold feet and didn't want to compete against Nintendo because they thought Nintendo was going to dominate that entire console cycle, and they were completely wrong, because obviously we all know PlayStation 1 took home the gold cup and they beat everyone else by a country mile. But that is Ironblood, the 4 versions I possess and the 4 versions that are known to exist, the 1 enhanced demo and 3 unenhanced demos. And if you want to see more 3DO M2 content in 4K, just leave me a comment down below. I'm making these as they go out, seeing how the views do and coming back to them if they do well. But Ironblood on 3DO M2 is real. It's something you can play if you have the hardware, and it looks pretty. See you next time. Bye-bye.